through our phone line?
Yep, sorry.
No problem, no problem.
Sorry.
So it's either peer-to-peer support, where we empower the people to make their own action plans and connect them to the resources in their area. For communities, we champion civic engagement, advocacy, and public awareness. And that's why we're here. We are present in schools. We conduct community workshops and being directly involved in crisis intervention. Using our analytics, we shift our focus to where it is needed most, and we drive dialogue within community. We also turn up for a lot of unfortunate incidents that happened in our community. So we had to go for grief counseling sessions that were on an emergency basis. So we have recently set up a mobile unit that turns up at any grief counseling sessions that are needed in any community. So that's our mission. So let's jump into it and let's talk about mental health, right? So what I just wanted to, and I really want this session to be more interactive, where I get to hear from you all and be comfortable for you to share. And I'm sure, Shauna, they can unmute themselves and talk, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So I'm just going to put this question out. So how are you feeling today? How is your mental health? What's going on? Anybody would like to share? I know I'm very happy because it's sunny after a long time, and that's very rare here. We hardly get to see the sun.
And they can also share in the chat as well.
Sure, go ahead. Yes, please. I can check the chat. Nervous about an interview, very stressed. Totally. I was so stressed about this presentation, honestly. Sunshine is good and energized by MFCA training. Wow. Yes, absolutely. Sure. I love coming to presentations like this. They get your brain jogging. Wa alaikum assalam, Fawaz. So good to hear from you, all of you. I just feel like being a teacher, having a one-off conversation doesn't really work. So I just want you to be part of this conversation, because the goal of this presentation is to empower you to help the foster youth. So if you want to interact with me, you want to learn these tools, we got to be on the same page. And inshallah, there will be quite a lot of opportunities to bring you into the conversation. It's snowing and I cannot take out my motors. It's snowing? Really? Oh my God, which part of the world is this? Oh no. I don't want to see that white thing again. I think I'm done with it. So awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. All my projects for this semester, and I'm saying, oh, my graduation. Oh, congratulations on your graduation. It's scorching hot there. Okay, awesome. So I wanna bring all of us back to what we're gonna be doing today. And this is my favorite exercise to start a presentation with. So we're going to get in tune with ourselves with something called as mindful breathing. And I really encourage you guys to do it more often whenever you're sitting down to learn, to study, or just wind down at the end of the day. So we're going to take 3 minutes only and go through this mindful breathing together, okay?
Mindful breathing. Close your eyes and rest your hands on your knees. Bring your attention to the touch of your body on your seat. Feel the weight of your body on your chair or cushion. Make sure that your back is straight and that you're comfortable. Take a few deep breaths. While you're breathing deeply, relax your shoulders, your stomach muscles, the muscles in your face, your hands, and your legs. Let go of all the tightness in your body. Now bring your attention back to your breath. Notice what it feels like as it enters through your nose, goes down through your throat, filling your lungs, and back out through your nose. Notice your stomach and chest rise and fall each time you breathe in and each time you breathe out. And just allow your breathing to be natural and relaxed. Now bring your attention to the feeling of your breath in your nose. Feel your breath as it comes in and goes out. Just focus on this sensation, paying attention to each time you breathe in and each time you breathe out. As you inhale, maybe your breath feels cool. And as you exhale, maybe it feels a little warmer. When your mind wanders, or if you become distracted, just notice what's going on in your head, and then gently bring your attention back to your breath, going in and out. Focus on the feeling of your breath and allow thoughts and feelings to come and go in the background. Now gently bring your attention back to the touch of your body on your seat and open your eyes.
How did that feel? And anybody like to share it in the messages? Or you can unmute yourself and talk. Experience was out of this world, yes. It really calms you down. Like I said, I was really stressed about this presentation, but now I feel like it's calmed down. This one of the exercises I love doing in the morning with my students before we start class. Like, it really helps you wind down. Absolutely. Yet I forget to do it. Great reminder. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to
Mindful breathing.
start again.
Close your eyes and rest.
So, yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about what are some of the issues, and a lot of the conversations that are going to happen today about Naseeha, it will be a little on the heavier side. That's why I wanted to go through the meditation before, so we can get in tune with our feelings and talk about things that actually impact our inner feelings. And these things that we're going to be talking about are a little heavy. So if at any point you feel that it's triggering or that it's too much for you to handle, you can always feel free to step away from your computer or your screen, or mute your screen for a while. So what are some of the issues that we see at the Naseeha helpline? The depression has been one of the highest issues that we've seen recently. There's a lot of trauma, or we're going to talk more about trauma, a lot of complex trauma. We have abuse issues, a lot of issues related to loneliness and sexuality and dealing with those issues, addictions, relationships, bullying, and suicidality. And we're going to talk more about these issues. But first, let's go into a little bit of quick facts about mental health. We know that 20% of youth affected 20% of the youth are affected by some kind of mental illness. And by age 40, that 20% goes up to 50% of people who will have had a mental illness at some point in their life. These are global stats, which means that every one of us in some way or the other would be affected by a mental illness, because either you might go through one or you might see your loved one and someone you know go through it. So it's by the age that you're 40, you will have an experience with mental health in some way or the other. In Canada and US, only 1 out of 5 children receive appropriate mental health services. This is alarming because the age that mental illnesses are usually diagnosed are during the young ages. And as soon as they are at that age where they manifest signs and symptoms of a mental illness, out of those kids that are affected by them, only 1 out of 5 kids actually receives the help that they need to. Some facts about suicide. It is the number 2 leading cause of death for ages 15 to 34. Number 2 and number 1 only being accidents. Every 12 minutes, someone dies by suicide. This is alarming. By the time we finished our presentation, there would already be almost 10 people who have experienced suicide. Women attempt 2 to 3 times more, men 3 times more likely to die by suicide. There are 4,000 suicide deaths in Canada alone in 2020. I know the reason why I brought these stats up is because a lot of times in our community, there's a lot of taboo around talking about suicide. However, research suggests that the more you talk about suicide, the less likely people are to attempt it, and more likely they are to share about something that might be bothering them. So do not discourage these discussions. In fact, try to bring them in. And I really would suggest that there is something called as an assist training. It is not just meant for people who are involved in mental health, but it's for everybody. Reach out to your nearest location that offers an assist training that really helps you deal with anybody who might be having suicide thoughts. It's like, first aid. You might go into a first aid training. So assist training is first aid for people who might be having suicidal thoughts. So quick stats about Naseeha. We had 899 calls back into 2018, but our calls have been increasing every year. So these are from March 2022 was where we saw a dip in the calls that we received. However, our text actually increased. The recent stats close to the end of 2022, our calls went up again around 6,000. I think I have another slide. Yeah. So we have 6,220 calls that are logged in. And sorry, that's supposed to be Jan 2023. It's not 2022. Our text chats have increased to almost 1,000. We have 175 plus web therapy clients that are in the wait list. I mean, 175 are being taken care of, and then 100 plus that are still in the wait list. Most of our issues that we receive on Naseeha are dealing with relationships, and there's a lot of abuse related to relationships. There are a lot of things like I find it hard to make friendships. I find it hard to get along with my parents, or there is a boyfriend-girlfriend issue. So a lot of relationship issues. Mental health, there are kids who call in and they're aware of the issues that they're facing in terms of mental health. Psychological issues is another one that is pretty much connected to their mental health. Societal pressure and others. So we're going to come back to some of these facts again. I wanted to bring this picture up just to show you, we pretty much discussed most of it, that we have a staggering 3.2 million kids who are at risk of developing depression in Canada alone, between the ages of 12 to 19. And out of that, these kids, only 1 out of 5 is getting the help that they need to. And despite Naseeha is just the first line of contact for them. So if you, being community members, encourage these kids to call into Naseeha, they would be having some form of support as compared to none. So we're trying to combat this 1 out of 5 stat by being the first line of support for these kids, inshallah. Okay, so I want to ask you one more question. What do you think are the biggest barriers for seeking support among Muslim youth? Why do you think that when we talking about mental health or reaching out to somebody, why would they not want to talk about it? Any suggestions? What do you think are the barriers? It's a taboo subject, absolutely. Culture, yeah. There's a lot of shame associated with, yes. There's a lot of stereotyping, weakness, absolutely. They feel like they would be judged for what they're going to say. Weakness is a really good one that we usually see that in our male youth, in fact, in general, that they don't want to show their weakness, that, oh, I'm strong enough to handle that. And that's something that was promoted culturally, that, oh, boys don't cry sort of philosophy. So these boys, they don't want to reach out and say that they're going through something. That's why, according to stats, there are more women reaching out for mental health support compared to men. However, the prevalence of mental illnesses for most, although it varies according to condition, for most is equal among men and women. Yet we have women reaching out for supports more than men reaching out for supports. So it's really encouraged that we counter one of this barriers. So some of them, some of them that I just listed down here were, there are things like cultural differences. A lot of times Muslim youth do not call in because they feel that, oh, the person on the line is not going to understand my culture. They're not going to understand why my parents said so and so, because it's pretty normal in our culture to say this, but they're going to take it in a different light. So there's a lot of cultural differences. There's a lot of language barriers as well, where we see, especially those who are new immigrants, they don't feel comfortable talking in any other language, and that's what creates this difference. There is a lot of misuse of trust in God paradigms. I wanted to take some time and talk about what trust in God paradigm actually means. A lot of times we say that if you're depressed, it's because you're away from Allah, or it's because you don't pray enough. Oh, it's because you don't trust in God like you're supposed to. So this is a misuse of this trust in God paradigm. It's possible that someone is very close to God, someone is very religious and they pray 5 times a day, but still they're going through a mental illness. It's totally possible. But a lot of times in our culture, it so happens that we tell them that, oh, it's because you're away from your religion that you're experiencing that. There's lack of cultural humility. Of course, there's age differences. We've heard a lot about generation gaps. So they go like, they don't understand us. They don't understand the struggles this generation is going through. And lastly, there's a lot of stigma, and every culture has a different kind of stigma related to mental health. Oh, you are? Okay. I don't know why that is happening all of a sudden. I'm sorry, I'm going to take a minute and reshare my screen so that I can just, okay. Sorry about that. I'm just gonna, okay. So, culture versus religion. What are the things that are usually promoted in our culture? And what are the things that are actually true in terms of what it should be like? So, in our culture, we say you just need to be more grateful. Stop. What do you mean you're depressed? It should mean that you're just not being grateful enough. So what you can do instead is promote mercy, love, and compassion that our religion promotes. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves you, that Allah is there for you, and Allah will always take care of you, instead of saying that, oh, you need to be more grateful. God is punishing you because you sinned. A lot of times people say that. However, that is not correct. And we know this through our religion, that Allah tests us. There are tests in life, but with every test comes enough strength to handle it. Allah does not burden a soul more than it can handle. And for every disease, and there's a hadith that says that for every disease, Allah has created a cure. So there is nothing that is too big for you to handle. There is nothing that there is no cure for. And a lot of times when we talk about cure, our culture also tells us that if you pray, things will get better. And that's enough of a cure. It is an amazing tool, also a mental health tool, if not just spiritual. Prayer is an amazing tool to help you cope with a lot of mental health issues. However, there's also additional support related, in association with prayer. There is counseling, there's therapy, there are medications that are available, and that is part of treating the condition that you're in. And sometimes this borderlines on spiritual abuse, where you try to push a person away from mental health supports because you feel that religion should be enough to cure it, whereas that is not true. That was also not the way of the Salaf, like the predecessors and previous generations. Muslims were one of the first civilizations to come up with hospitals that were only based on mental health supports. We had entire hospitals that were more like where people could get that spiritual energy and they could recover from conditions like anxiety and depression. And they were the first one to recognize that as a disease. And this happened just like 300 years ago, but it seems like it has been mixed up with culture and lost somewhere in the middle. Okay, I don't know if my slides are moving. Okay, no. Yeah. Okay, so how can we make things better? And I wanted to take some time and talk about what we can do to make things better. And I know I have just one word on the slide, and that is to listen, right? But I wanted to open the floor up to you. What do you mean by listening? Right? If I tell you that the only way you can improve or you can help somebody who's struggling through mental health issues is by listening. So what do you think I mean by listening? And I would really appreciate if any of you would want to unmute themselves and jump into the conversation. How can we help people struggling with mental health issues, and how can we listen to them? Shauna, you got quite a quiet bunch here.
Here we are.
When you mean listen, what do you just mean, like being there for someone? Because most of the time it's not necessarily wanting an answer necessarily, or like a solution based, like at the time. It's normally just want to maybe talk it out, and sort of, it's similar to having a therapist. Like the therapist isn't necessarily there to tell you what's wrong or to fix your problems, but to make you sort of do a little bit more realization of what's happening, what you're going through.
Absolutely. You got it on spot. Yes. Not solving the problem and just listening to what they have to say. Awesome. Stephanie says allowing them the opportunity to be open and share, and letting them know you are there, allowing them to open up and share. What do you think would make them open up and share? How would you make them comfortable enough to open up and share?
I saw what Saeed said, which is by listening, we can put ourselves in their shoes for better understanding.
So. Absolutely. You can put yourself in. Another word for that would be to be more compassionate to what they're going to say. Knowing you care and are there to help support. If they are sure that you care about them and you're there to help and support, absolutely. That is one way you can improve listening. Has anybody heard the difference between listening and hearing? There's a difference between listening and hearing. And does anybody know what the difference between listening and hearing is? Oh, Go ahead, Alexander.
Yeah, for me, it's because I understand that like I probably have ADHD, and so this is a very stark difference between listening and hearing someone. Like if I'm just listening to them, I'm listening to the words they're saying and not necessarily doing a lot of understanding, but hearing them is like, or maybe it's switched around, but the point is that like one is like I'm listening to what you're saying, but I'm not hearing the words and the intent and the intention that you are putting into those words. And so that's something that I sometimes even struggle with, to like always fully pay attention, understand, and listen or hear what they're saying.
Hear what they're saying, absolutely. And Fawaz says we hear traffic and nature, but we listen, we try, but we have to listen to people. Yep, that's a good difference. Very good. So listening is actively listening has actually two goals. First, we try to understand what the other person is communicating, like Alexander just mentioned. So in a conversation, there are two goals. First, we try to understand what the other person is communicating. And when we say understand, I'm also trying to understand the words that you're saying, but I'm also trying to look at your body language and feel the emotions that you're trying to communicate to me. That's my goal number one. And second, I'm trying to convey my interest and engagement and caring to the other person. The second goal is not to merely for the sake of kindness. You don't try to nod your head and act kind because that's the good thing to do. But genuine care is that you try to show your interest and engagement. If people do not feel listened to, they will cease to share any information. So in any conversation, we always need to make sure we know these two goals, that we are listening and trying to understand both the overt meaning and the covert meaning. And we're trying to also convey the care and the compassion and the kindness through our gestures, through our nonverbal cues, so that they know that we care about them. And I have this very tiny slide that I wanted to, share with you about what are the do's and don'ts of being a good listener. So always ask open-ended questions that allows people to share a lot more. And, asking multiple questions at the same time, you know what, honestly, I tend to do that a lot of times, but I'm trying to improve is ask open-ended questions, give time for answers. I mean, silence is not always a bad thing. Allowing them to break that silence by themselves is a good option. Reflect what the speaker says to make sure you understand. There is no rush to reply. Sometimes when we're listening, we're formulating the reply in our head at the same time. We're listening to respond. We're not listening to understand. So taking time to reflect on what the speaker said. After they're done talking, then you take time and then respond back. There's nothing wrong in taking that time. Spend more time listening instead of speaking. Calm yourself, like the meditation we did. Once we calm ourselves down, it's a lot easier to listen to other people. It's a lot easier to not jump into the conversation yourself and let them break the silence. Ask for permission before you offer advice and suggestion. And that's one key thing that I really learned, especially with my teenage kids, was that you cannot offer advice. You cannot offer a solution to the problem, because maybe that person at that point only wants to be heard. And communicating that I am here to listen to you. I'm not here to give my point of view. I'm not here to judge you. Only communicating that I'm here to listen to you is a big thing. And that's what we try to do at Naseeha as well. Seek to understand what the speaker is saying, even if it is contrary to your viewpoint. Just try to understand what they're saying. Ask questions that might help you understand a situation. Okay, so somebody in the chat, body language when listening is key. Absolutely, body language is key. Okay, so we're gonna And I'm going to ask you, oh, why is this not moving?
I like what Alexander says, which is, I love asking follow-up questions. This is how I found to listen better.
Follow up.
Yeah.
Exactly. I read this in one of the research articles about asking follow-up questions. A lot of times we rephrase what the other person said, and it might not be what they said. And when we rephrase it, the other person feels like, oh, you didn't listen to me correctly. This is not what I meant. So explicitly saying things like, I'm trying to understand what you're saying. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Is this what you just said? And then rephrasing it really helps. And honestly, I mean, this is one of the key skills that you can practice anytime with anyone, right? And just being consciously aware of what you're doing when you're listening helps you become not just a better supporter or caregiver, but also a better person in the longer run. So I want to ask you these open-ended questions too, right? So how can we make things better? And that's why we're here today. We're talking about tools for foster youth, Muslim foster youth, and we want to make things better for them. So ask those you're trying to help. Is there anything you wish I knew about you so that I could help you, support you better? And this is a key golden question, that if you ask them, what can I do to support you? They would everyone always knows what they need. They just need to discover it somewhere inside them. And asking those questions would really help you direct yourself towards the support that they need. And at the same time, ask yourself, is there anything I should know about them so I can help support them better? You know, just like Alexander said, I like to ask follow-up questions. Ask yourself too, what is it that I need to know? And ask them, what is it that you want to tell me so I can be a better support for you? So some of the common conditions that you might encounter among people, and we talked about the stats previously, was depression, which is persistent low mood and lack of motivation, and general anxiety, social anxiety, and PTSD. We're going to do more in detail on trauma, but just a reminder that a lot of times we do feel down, we have a low mood, there is a lack of motivation. That's part of life. But these conditions are when a low mood or lack of motivation extends for more than a specific period of time, more than 3 months, or is accompanied by other symptoms, then it is categorized as an illness. And a lot of times these things do not get diagnosed because we think that, oh, it's okay to feel like that. Oh, you know what, this is part of life. But if a person is going through, and this is for all of us actually, if you're going through a persistent low mood, you know that, oh, it's been too long that I've been in this low mood. There is something wrong. You know that, oh, you know what, when I worry, I don't worry like everybody else does. I worry excessively. You know, I have problem focusing. I start sweating. I have a high heart rate, and that really upsets me. This is not normal. So when your internal alarm gives you that sign that this is not normal, and it's very important to seek support so that, you know, it can differentiate between what's an illness and what's just a mental distress. So I want to jump right into, Shauna, do you have a time limit here?
It's usually 1 hour.
It's usually one. So good. I'm on time.
You have some time, yes.
Awesome. So this is the main gist of what I wanted to discuss today, was about trauma. Before we begin, I just wanted to let you know that whatever we're going to talk about trauma, it might get triggering for some folk. If you feel that the information that is being shared is too sensitive or triggering, please try to step away from the screen or mute the screen. If you feel that you want to talk to someone about what you just experienced, please call on our helpline, which is 1-866-627-3342. And I'm just gonna move forward here. Yeah, so I wanted to discuss a case study. Let's start discussing trauma based on a case study. So let's say there is a 17-year-old Muslim boy born to immigrant parents. He is in foster home and he's from war-torn Afghanistan. His older brother died in front of his eyes. He was shot by a gun. Therefore, he often has flashbacks and nightmares of that time. He cannot focus in school. He often feels numb in terms of emotions and feelings. He is irritable. He's aggressive. He has outbursts. He often gets angry very quickly. He's anxious and he feels depressed and lonely. If this person came to you, how would you respond to him? And what would you want to ask and know more about? You know, basically, how would you support him? What do you think? Mm-hmm. And I'm assuming that this is a scenario that could be quite common in foster care, that there are kids or their youth that are coming from war-torn countries that have experienced trauma. I'll be careful not to trigger him. I am not a therapist, so I should not open up things that I can't handle. Okay, rather provide him compassionate support. Mm-hmm. With compassionate support. Okay, being there for him, caring for him. So what does compassionate support look like? Honor him, perhaps, for surviving what he did and being here to thrive and heal. Awesome, Teresa. This is something known as strength-based counseling, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. That honor him for being courageous enough to be here, despite all of that. Mm-hmm. I don't think it would be about asking him questions, but mostly asking, what can I do for you? That is perfect. That's the question. What can I do for you that will help you feel supported? That is a golden question. And what do you want me to understand about you to help you support better, right? And active listening, empathizing with him, be where he's at and not probe him for info that he may not be ready to provide. Letting him know his feelings are valid for his experiences. Yep, that's a good starting point. Do you want to talk about it? Asking that question. Do you want to talk about it? Because I'm here to listen to you. That's something we do on our helplines all the time. And like Maliha said, being where he is and listening to only what he is able to provide to you at that point. Non-judgmental, anonymous listening. Letting him know that his feelings are valid. Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna jump from, I want you to keep this case study in mind because we're gonna come back to this at the end of the discussion of trauma, and we're trying to dismantle each one of his experiences. We're gonna talk about trauma. So what is trauma actually? It's an actual or threatened physical, emotional, or sexual violation that is either experienced personally or witnessed, right? So in the case of this boy, he actually witnessed a trauma where his brother was shot in front of him. So that was, you might say it's not something that directly happened to him, but something that he witnessed. So a lot of times even threatened physical, emotional, or sexual violation can cause trauma. For example, kids who come from war-torn countries have seen a lot of violence. They might not have experienced it themselves, or they might have, but that also accounts as trauma. It can, and one last thing that is often not included in trauma is neglect. Poor support in childhood is also a form of trauma. And we're going to talk more about neglect and poor child support at a young age, because that is such a vicious loop that actually continues in countries where trauma is very prevalent. Okay, So what is a traumatic event that qualifies? So we actually use a diagnostic tool to judge whether a person, whether trauma qualifies as something that would cause PTSD. So usually a single recent traumatic event, like car crash or a violent assault, can be a traumatic event. A single traumatic event that occurred in the past could also be classified as a traumatic event. A long-term chronic pattern, and that's what leads to neglect and complex trauma, is when it's happening over and over and over again during childhood. So that's ongoing childhood neglect, ongoing physical abuse, ongoing sexual abuse can cause complex trauma. So it could either be one event or it could be multiple that happened. What does trauma do to people? And it's quite shocking, and we all can relate to it. It literally shakes you up to your core. Things happen that a person would never imagine can happen to him. There are things beyond control that are happening inside the body as a result of trauma. There are a lot of physical signs of trauma. There would be sleep trouble. There could be fatigue, tiredness, because of course there's no sleep. There could be eating disturbance in eating patterns. There could be the startling response of the body where you get startled over every little small noise, because maybe the country that you came from, the bomb blasts were very prevalent. There were lots of gunshots that were going out. So a little bit of a noise startles them. So the physical body actually manifests the effects of trauma. Sometimes it messes with your mind. Thoughts are not clear. What's happening inside the head is not that easy to decipher. You're not being able to understand little tiny details. And a lot of times you might experience that in your foster care experience, that these kids don't do too well at school because simple things are not making sense in the head. As long as you don't deal with their trauma, these things are not going to make sense in the head. It affects relationships because they feel very numb and they don't feel emotions. They have difficulty feeling emotions. And that creates problems in relationships. And from your perspective, if you are a foster caregiver and you feel that the person that you're giving care to is not being responsive, it's not because they don't feel grateful enough, or they're not they don't have any emotions towards you. It's just because they're unable to express it at that point. They have trouble with emotions. They have trouble actually managing them as well. So you might see a lot of aggression, a lot of anger, a lot of misplaced emotions at places. So, and one of the key features of trauma is that they're unable to separate past from present. So there's a lot of mistrust of people because they have difficulty separating that they are here now, they're not in that country. That whatever incident that happened in their past was in their past, it's not happening right now, but they're not being able to separate past from present. And a lot of therapy, actually, the EMDRs and things like that they do, try to separate past from present for them. So trauma can be simple trauma or complex trauma. If there is one incident that happened and that has left you traumatized, then that's a simple trauma. Or it could be a complex trauma that results from neglect in childhood and neglect in or repeated physical or sexual abuse during childhood that causes complex trauma. Or it could be a mixture of both a lot of times. So I wanted to touch base on what complex trauma is, because a lot of times it gets covered by many different factors. One thing is that it's neglect or it's repeated emotional pain. And it's long-term, it's not a single event. It mostly affects parent-child relationships. And parents often struggle with understanding that they are inflicting trauma or they're part of that trauma. And then trauma breeds trauma. And that's the vicious cycle that I wanted to talk about, is people who come from war-torn countries are actually already suffering from trauma. And then sometimes they inflict that trauma on their children. And then that creates a whole loop of trauma breeding further trauma. And as long as we don't realize or intercept the cycle and try to dissociate trauma from the person and being mindful of what they're doing, this cycle would not end. So creating awareness around what trauma is and actually dealing with it in the right manner at the right time and calling it what it is actually is what actually helps. And we're going to talk about more about what you can do. So outcomes of being stuck in a painful past actually leads to other things, other physical things that are happening. It can lead to substance use and self-harm. If trauma is not dealt with on time or intercepted when it has occurred, it can lead to other things, negative coping mechanisms like substance use, like self-harm, or even suicide is a result of trauma sometimes. Violence, aggression, it can go in the opposite direction where there's lots of violence, aggression, and crime happening as a result of that. Isolation or trust issues, some people go into a shell and they shut themselves out from the rest of the world to deal with the trauma. There's a lot of guilt and shame, and there's a lot of self-blame. That's one key factor in trauma, is that the victim feels that it was their fault. Somehow it was their fault that this happened. So there's a lot of guilt and shame related with self-blame. And then that all leads to depression and anxiety. There's a quote that I really like, is that, anger is hurt that didn't know where to go. Because anger is, at the end of the day, it's a secondary emotion. It is not a primary emotion. It's actually a result of something that is happening a lot deeper. And if you develop the mindset of understanding why a certain person is showing a certain emotion, it makes a lot of sense that why this person is angry. Because actually it's just a hurt. It's just an emotion that was not dealt with. And I hope, inshallah, that we can all be that Band-Aid on the hurt that a person is feeling, so that it doesn't spread out and become something poisonous like anger. Also about suicide, it's not that I want to die, it's that I just really don't want to live. Because living becomes so hard because of all the things that we discuss. Like, living with trauma is not easy. And sometimes just living, just surviving with those thoughts in your head is just so traumatizing that you just don't want to live. And that's what leads to suicide. Nobody wakes up one morning and says that I want to die today. Nobody wants to think that that death is something that they like. It's just living part that becomes hard. And I hope, inshallah, that we can help heal them better so that living becomes a little bit easier every single day. So one thing that I did not discuss when we were talking about outcomes of trauma or symptoms of trauma was there's a lot of repetition of the same scene over and over and over in their heads. They would play the scene out in their heads. And sometimes it could be in relation to a trigger, or sometimes it could be spontaneous. So sometimes the whole scene would come back and over, and there would be this is called a flashback that will keep on happening. And can you imagine how painful and hurtful that could be? Like, you're going through the entire traumatic experience all over again in your head. So sometimes in order to block that, it's very important that they express and share it more than once. Not just once, but keep on telling you about what they experienced. So we're going to come back to the case of this 17-year-old boy. And I want to ask you, what do you think now, after all of this information? What do you think would be some ways to help him? Awesome. So I have some solutions here. Let me just, judgment-free listening, say, I am here for you, and ask about mental health. Help find supports and provide strength-focused therapy to them. So yeah, this is what I wanted to, and we're gonna, yeah, this is the last one. This is the last slide that I want to focus on. Trauma is treatable by friends and family. This is the most amazing part of it. Yes, you can reach out to therapy. You can reach out to medications. Their professional help is always available. But being here among you guys as caregivers, I want to give you hope that you can actually break the cycle of trauma just by being their friend, family, or just a teacher, and let them express those feelings and deal with. And I know you don't want to trigger them. You don't want them to be in a place where you can't handle that situation, but it's always advisable to let them express and be there for them if you have the capacity to listen and care for them the way they should be. So I'm just gonna wrap it up and end it here and see if you guys have any questions. Yeah, Shauna, are there any questions?
Yeah, if there's any questions, please ask. We are also so thankful, Sonia, for you to be here with Naseeha. We are going to, we hope to bring you back next month for part 2 to address some of the questions and to address the rest of the presentation that we'd like to, and have some hands-on tools that you'd be able to apply to the foster youth and have at your fingertips. So that session can be covered in the next one. But currently, if anyone has questions for Sonia, please feel free to ask in the chat or even just, say it out loud. And we could also get them back to provide some resources. I shared their website. I shared their hotline. And I believe, Sonia, if you can expand, isn't there a text line as well?
Yes, it's the same number. The text line is for the same number, 1866 Naseeha.
Excellent. Okay, so the text line is the same number as the hotline to getting help. I think it's so important that we note that number for the youth that we serve, and we'll bring her back. We'll bring her back for some Q&A that we can address later, and also for any other resources that she can share with us in our presentation in our session next time. But if you have anything you'd like to ask her right now, please go ahead.
I see there is a question by Amanda in the chat. And she says, you mentioned the trauma need to be addressed in a certain time frame. What time frame would that be? So I don't want to give you wrong information because I'm not a doctor, but yes, this presentation was made by a doctor. So I think PTSD is diagnosed when you have experiences of trauma for more than 3 months. That's when it becomes a mental illness. So I would assume anything below 3 months, if you can, someone experienced a trauma and within 3 months you're able to address and talk to them about it, and they don't develop the symptoms of PTSD, that's a big, huge achievement. Any other questions?
Yeah.
No, awesome.
If no one has any questions, thank you for joining MFCA today. We will continue with this
Teresa,
topic.
Teresa had a question, but Teresa, you are muted.
Go ahead.
Talking to myself. I just wondered if the recording would be made available, because we had some foster parents that had to miss that, and it was so very good.
Absolutely, Teresa. Yes, I'll be able to share the link for this workshop, and I hope everyone benefited. And I think there's so many resources that we can use, and mental health is something that we just need to address. It's out there, and I'm really grateful to Naseeha for providing this workshop to us that we can hopefully also continue again.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah.
I actually, would like to take a moment to, appreciate. I don't have a question, but I want to appreciate Ms. Sonia and the Muslim Foster Care Association for this meeting. It was really eye-opening, and we got to learn a lot from this. So thank you so much once again. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you, Saeed Fawaz. Thank you for that comment. We hope to continue with these informational workshops so that we could all help each other and help the youth in the system.
Guess that's it. No more questions?
Yep.
Thank you so much, Shauna, for having me here as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're grateful to you too for joining us, and it's such a needed topic and help. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. All right. So I'm just going to end this. Thank you, Sonia.
You're welcome.
I mean, appreciate everyone joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day.